Eagles fans, the NFL draft is finally upon us. We are less than 24 hours away from finding out what the next era of Eagles football has in store. Will it be led by Jalen Hurts? Will there be another shock move by the Eagles front office? Will they finally shore up the secondary or add an electric playmaker at 12? Only time will tell, but in case you've missed anything this offseason with the Philadelphia Eagles, we're here to fill the gaps, go over my personal big board of prospects for the first two rounds of the draft, and give some predictions for what we could expect during tomorrow's action. My name is Liam Jenkins and welcome to your ultimate Eagles draft primer. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I know our content has been a little bit lacking on the YouTube front. It is because we've been fully sending the written content. So if you're not checking out phillysportsnetwork.com, make sure you do. That's where you can get daily coverage from myself and all of our writers across all of our sports teams in Philadelphia. I promise though this draft is going to act as like a revitalization for the channel. There will be film rooms on the prospects, there will be reactions, and of course a big live stream bonanza. So if you want to watch the draft, you don't have NFL Network, you don't have ESPN, don't worry, you can watch it along with myself, with the guys from Flipping the Birds, with all of your favorite writers from PSN all across the weekend. We're streaming every pick, every round, every team, every moment. And if you're new to the channel, let's just look back at last year's draft to remember how excited I got when the team selected John Hightower.
John Hightower. The boys! Come on! I've got a draft crush as an Eagle! Go on!
Look, there's still time, okay? There's still time. But that was the past. We've got to look at the present. The Eagles come into this draft off the back of a very, very turbulent offseason. The year ended in heartbreaking fashion for the Eagles. Jalen Hurts pulled in a Week 17 game, a meaningless game, in order to bolster their draft position. This led to a lot of anger amongst Eagles fans, and it ultimately led to the firing of Doug Peterson. It may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. There were a lot of discussions between Peterson, Roseman, and Jeffrey Lurie, and ultimately they decided that it just wasn't the right fit anymore. Peterson stepped away after a year where his temperament with the media changed. He was very abrupt. There was a lot of rumors that then came out about how interfering the front office has been with giving them personnel and the players that they should be using on game day. It's a very dark hole, but ultimately this then led to Carson Wentz being traded to the Indianapolis Colts and Jalen Hurts technically for now being named the starter, although they won't really name him just yet. Nick Sirianni brings Jonathan Gannon and a bunch of friendly faces from Indianapolis with him to coach the Philadelphia Eagles, along with a very optimistic, a very energetic coaching style, one that Philadelphia probably isn't that familiar with. As you go back through the past maybe 10 years of Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, and Doug Peterson, Peterson was close and got a bit sarcastic and very passive-aggressive towards the end. Sirianni will give 10-minute answers and get very, very passionate about what he's talking about. I like to see that. We've learned a lot from him already about what he plans to do with this team, and I think that if they can draft the right pieces, the one thing I'll say about this NFL draft is that in previous years, I said many, many times on podcasts and articles, there appeared to have been a disconnect between the front office and the coaching staff. They want to draft a certain type of player, the coaching staff want to play a different type of player. The two often collided. What we're seeing now is Sirianni say, if you give me a square peg, I'm going to mold my circle hole so it fits it, so we utilize your skill sets, and that tells me they're on the same page. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it won't be a train wreck. We can hope. That leads us on to positional needs then. The Eagles spent much of this offseason digging themselves out of a very, very deep salary cap hole. One that they are out of for the time being. Not a ton of leverage to go and bring in those big free agent names though. The biggest of all, Eric Wilson. He was also brought in alongside safety Anthony Harris. The two of them, formerly of Minnesota, 2 very big years they came off, somehow slipped through the free agency cracks. They will reunite with Jonathan Gannon, who was a previous Mike Zimmer disciple, which tells us the Eagles are going to be running a variation of his cover 2 defense, not the version that we're seeing utilized in Indianapolis right now. So that may be something worth noting when you're looking at players. The one thing to bear in mind though is that they do typically have, both Minnesota and Indianapolis, strong linebackers. Something that has ironically evaded the Eagles for about the past forever. And that may change. You know, we know Alex Singleton had a good year. TJ Edwards has promised. Nate Gary no longer around. that's for the best. Eric Wilson's going to hold that Mike spot for the time being, but will the Eagles go on and search for a long-term Mike in this year's draft? There are some intriguing candidates. Nick Bolton, for instance, is certainly one of them, and as you go deeper and deeper into the draft, you're going to find more names. Jabril Cox out of LSU could well be another one, or do they want to go for that hybrid type of player like the Joker himself, the JOK, who told he was the perfect fit to play in Philadelphia? He could also be an option at linebacker. But for the most part, I think that Eric Wilson for the time being is going to tide them over until such a time as maybe there is a game-breaking prospect that comes out, and with 3 first-round picks, it makes way more sense to hold off, let Singleton and Edwards develop again, see what you've got in Wilson. He may play himself to a new deal anyway, and then bring in a guy. Let's not forget Davion Taylor drafted as a weak side linebacker. You've also got Sean Bradley there as well from last year's class. Cornerback is probably the biggest need on the roster, in my opinion, at the very least, because the Eagles are facing pretty much every half-decent receiver in the NFL next season, and that schedule's not going to lighten up. It doesn't matter who they face in 2023 and beyond. The NFC East is stacked right now when it comes to receivers. It's not just Dallas anymore with their trio of CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, and Amari Cooper. It's not even just New York with what they've done with their receiving corps. You've, of course, got to worry about scary Terry McLaurin in Washington, and that's going to mean the Eagles need cornerback help. What we did see last year was Darius Slay holding his own for maybe 13 of the 16 games played, but because of that, quarterbacks went, well, I can't throw that way. Oh look, there's a 5'3" cornerback lined up on a 6'1" receiver. I'm going to exploit it. Avonte Maddox bullied into submission. Injuries not playing well either. He should ideally be shoved back inside to a nickel role, and without any depth behind him, Captain Cravon and Nickel Roby-Coleman both gone. I'm expecting the Eagles to draft a nickel cornerback in this year's draft. They have to get someone in there behind Maddox that's long term. He's in a contract year. His leash is very short. If he struggles with injury again, he may be on the way out. On the outside, they have to find someone tall to complement Darius Slay. Someone that maybe built in that same mold, or at least can offer some physicality at the line of scrimmage. Now, in its cover 2 defense, you are going to expect a lot more zonal play, which is why people are down on JC Horn a little bit for the Eagles, because he is predominantly a very successful press man corner. Now, it's not to say he can't play zone, we just haven't seen it yet. It's the same way people worried about Justin Jefferson last year coming off press coverage, because he didn't really play it. Hasn't stopped him in the NFL. I doubt it will in the future. Horn is a breakfast cornerback. Surtain for me is a dinner. I'm a dinner guy. I love those Bull Hawks. I would gladly take Surtain. You do have to look at guys like Greg Newsome and Caleb Farley a little bit further down the order, but for the most part, I think Surtain has to be the guy. Whether they trade up to get him or not, I don't know. But if it comes down to Surtain or Horn, either of them may be taken by New York and Dallas, which would be gut-wrenching for a team now that not only have they got no receivers and no corners, but all of the good ones are in their own division. That would sting. So hopefully the Eagles can make the right move to secure one of them at the very least. At wide receiver, it's a tricky one because Nick Sirianni has been preaching the term X so much it may as well be a Liam Jenkins podcast. It's clear what Sirianni wants in an X receiver. If you go through and look back at his history with wide receivers, you can see he's worked with a bunch of mid to late round draft picks, sizable guys, 6'1", 6'2", 6'4", going all the way back to Dwayne Bowe in Kansas City, all the way then through to what we've seen most recently, people such as Michael Pittman out of USC. So he's clearly developed an affinity for coaching up those taller guys. You've got someone in Travis Fulgham there who can play the X spot well. Can he do it consistently? That's where we need this wide receiver whisperer to come in. The problem with this wide receiver class, though, at the very top, so to speak, is that there's a lot of Z receivers. Jalen Waddle may be the most electric playmaker I've seen in the last 2 years from a wide receiving perspective. I'd take him over Ruggs, I would take him over Lamb, I'd take him over Judy, I'd certainly take him over Rager, over Mims, over Jefferson. He's the best guard of 2 years for me. Now, does that mean he's an X? I don't know. He's got a lot of blazing speed, but you're very much getting Jalen Rager and what Jalen Rager should be on two sides of the coin. So if you're going to push Jalen Rager into the slot and then take Waddle outside and have Fulgham on the other, I'd be about it. I could see that. I could get behind it. If you're not and you're just going to cramp up that Z spot, doesn't make sense to me. Devonta Smith, there are some legitimate size concerns. I don't know how much of those are going to pan into the draft decisions tomorrow. It's going to be very intriguing to watch. If he slips down to, let's say, 15, 16, is anyone going to come up and make an aggressive push for him? Beyond that, my guy for the Eagles, if I'm honest, is going to be someone like Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota. Sizable guy, a very, very precise route runner, and he's got a very eccentric release. Starts with his very, very wide base, which allows him to implement more and more false steps before the line of scrimmage, deceive the cornerback and get him into a position where he can leverage that body, where he doesn't have the quick breaks of some of those other guys, so he uses what tools he has, and one of them is that mental awareness, the ability to adjust for a quarterback. I'm a big fan of Bateman. I could very easily see a trade back from pick 12 or a trade up from 37 to go and get him. The one guy I wouldn't, and I wasn't going to mention in this video, but I'm going to do it anyway, is Terrace Marshall, and it's going to annoy a lot of people. Listen, I like Terrace Marshall. He's a fun receiver. I like watching him. Not for a first round pick, not for a second round pick. 2020 there was too much inconsistency. I know there were 7 drops. His pro day was littered with them. You can blame that on bad QB play if you want, but what I see from Terrace Marshall is John Hightower. And John Hightower was a steal as a 5th round pick, and I loved him, and I was besotted with the idea of it because I fell in love with the tape. If Terrace Marshall was a 5th round prospect, if you'd have switched Ihmir Smith-Marsette and Terrace Marshall around, I wouldn't have a problem with it because you're buying upside there with Marshall. When you look at someone like Bateman, you're seeing this polished skill set of what he can do around the ball, his ability to hold physical through the stem, to box out defenders, to pluck balls out of thin air, and to turn up field. What you see from Terrace Marshall, in my opinion, is a volume receiver who doesn't have anything he does extraordinarily well outside of he's got good intangibles. He's got a 78-inch wingspan. That's fine if he stops arms catching everything, if he can actually use his body, if he can track the ball. It's great having these tangibles. I haven't seen him use them consistently. There are way too many games where he just doesn't stand out for me. And that's what I'm ultimately looking for on tape. He gets bodied by defensive backs when he tries to block, which is an immediate red flag for Nick Sirianni's offense. There are effort questions. It's just not for me. It's the one receiver. I was down on Denzel Mims last year, down on Terrace Marshall this year. I just wouldn't take him. If the Eagles take him at 37 or they move up, I would probably have a breakdown. It's just not the pick for me. Of course, there is a minor need at tight end as well. Zach Ertz entering a contract year, probably going to be moved in the draft, or so reports indicate. Dallas Goedert also entering a contract year, not really proven he can be a TE1, despite having all this yak potential, despite clearly being so spicy with the ball in his hands. Getting onto the field and staying there has been just as much of a challenge as it has Zach Ertz breaking a tackle. So there's a lot of question marks there. Now, they've moved out of Kyle Pitts' range. Could they move back up? Potentially. I could also see them going after a guy like Hunter Long. 1 round later in the 3rd, I could see them going after Brevin Jordan, perhaps out of Miami a little bit later on in the draft. There are some names that could be developmental talent here. You look at Indianapolis last season when they had Jack Doyle. They, of course, used Derek Ebron the season before that. They've had Trey Burton in there. They get the most out of those rotational guys. I think the Eagles could very easily develop someone a little bit lower down their roster here. So tight end is a need. Not the biggest one, but I can see them targeting it in the mid-rounds for sure. And there is defensive end, and this is going to be the big one for me because the Eagles do need a defensive end. They've also got to work out what they're doing with Derek Barnett. I think they could very easily trade Derek Barnett during this draft window in a bid to move up. Same can be said for Andre Dillard. I've been hammering that train way too hard recently, so I'm going to leave off with Dillard tonight. But I think Derek Barnett is in a tricky spot. Brandon Graham is getting no younger. Derek Barnett is now in his option year that costs $10 million on a contract. Behind him, only really Josh Sweat and maybe Joe Osman. And perhaps Jannard Avery if you're going to move him to defensive end. Not a lot of hope, not a lot of promise beyond Josh Sweat. So if Derek Barnett isn't the guy, you've got one shot to get out of that contract right now. You've got one chance to move on from him, leverage him in a trade, go up and get your guy. Maybe it's going to be Quitty Pay at 12, and a lot of people would be annoyed, but to me, it hits reset on Barnett. It says, hey, it didn't work. We messed up a little bit. Let's bring in the new guy, get Barnett out while we can. I'd be all for it. You then just have to develop a depth option. You can go into the draft and pick up a 5th, a 6th, a 7th round pick and develop them. As long as they don't turn out to be Sharif Miller, who guarantees 10 sacks, can't even play 10 snaps as a 4th round pick. not great. If you can get someone nice and early, I think it can work. I think I've overloaded you guys with enough draft information for the time being. I've kind of given out where I would draft people. We've gone over needs. We've gone over how the Eagles got here. We've gone over some potential targets and non-targets as well. The last thing I'll say is, again, make sure you're checking out Philly Sports Network this weekend. Plenty of written, live, and video coverage all coming your way. And I promise this is going to kickstart our YouTube again. I'm so sorry for the lack of uploads, guys. It's been a tough year in terms of just grinding out written content over at PSN. I haven't had the time to sink into videos. I want that to change, though. We're going to make it happen. I will see you all over the course of the weekend. Thank you for watching this. Let me know who you would select down in the comments. I'll see you next time.